Dr. Fleck and ladies and gentlemen.
So as we gather here in Salzburg, we had just experienced a healthcare debate in the United States, which was, from a European point of view, absurd and highly ideological. And I would hypothesize that the basic question that was addressed in a healthcare debate in the United States was: is health a common good, or is health a private good? And I'm going to try to find an answer for this. And in order to jump the gun and anticipate the result of my speech, the answer is going to be yes. And so as we gather here, scientists and entrepreneurs all over the world, and obviously venture capitalists in Silicon Valley and elsewhere, are working to defeat death. Startups dedicated to fighting the aging process and to extending human life attract large amounts of capital, and digitalization is a major force of change in that respect. I myself turned 60 a couple of days ago, and right on the spot I receive online ads for hearing aids and wheelchairs and other paraphernalia of age. So new technologies such as genome editing with CRISPR allow scientists to take an engineering approach to biology. Digitalization and big data analysis further accelerate the scientific process. Ray Kurzweil, futurist, and we all know Google's director of engineering, predicts that by 2050 we'll walk into a doctor's office and receive a makeover treatment every few years. So he claims that death will be optional. We heard you referring to Homo Deus and Harari. Very similar theories are being projected there. I find that this question in the end is secondary, and I feel that something else is much more important. The dynamics we are currently witnessing in science and technology are fundamentally changing healthcare. For a very long time, healthcare's sole purpose was to tend to the sick and to the dying. It was meant to alleviate pain and suffering. From ancient Egypt and Greece to medieval Europe, healthcare was closely linked to mostly religious institutions. And as science progressed, products and services became more differentiated. And what once was purely charity-based evolved into also a thriving industry. And today, healthcare accounts for more than 10% of GDP in advanced economies. And treating and curing of patients is still healthcare's major task, but scientific progress and digital technologies increasingly enable patients to take matters into their own hands. Just consider the thousands and thousands of health apps that we can install on our smartphones to analyze personal health data. New concepts, new services such as genome sequencing make it possible to assess our personal risk of developing certain diseases and to adjust our lifestyle. And in the light of these developments, one question arises: is health still part of what you refer to as the common good, or is it becoming a private commodity? I have various industry federation jobs in addition to my day job, and I spent quite a lot of time in Geneva with the World Health Organization at the World Health Assembly. And if you were to experience these again highly ideologized debates there, you would probably have a very different impression of the hypothesis that you, Dr. Flick, put forward, in the sense of that the common good is sort of on retreat. My theory would be that in health we actually feel sort of an onslaught, an extreme onslaught of the common good against the private aspects of healthcare. And I want to discuss these aspects from a practitioner's perspective. The concept of the common good has been widely discussed in philosophy and social theory since the days of Plato and Aristotle, you mentioned it. And it's also a very common term in economics, and I'm not at all an expert in this matter, so I will stick to a rather general definition and refer to the common good as the maximum well-being of society. If we accept the notion of the common good, a further question comes to mind: how can we specify it? How can we define it? Can we define it at all? I personally share Karl Popper's view that there is no such thing as a final historic state towards which society evolves. The United Nations would disagree with me. They have defined the UN Sustainable Development Goals, 17 goals, which will lead to universal happiness of mankind within the next 15 years. Consequently, if you follow my argument, there can be no final objective definition of what constitutes the common good. Instead of pursuing a grand vision, we should take pragmatic steps and seek incremental improvements to specific problems. In the health field, we have made remarkable progress in recent years. I have started my career after doing R&D in academia in the United Nations field, and I've started working in the early 80s in Africa, in several countries in Africa and in Asia, and I went back into R&D in industry. I totally, deeply dispute the notion that the state of society, the state of health in Africa today has worsened. It has improved tremendously. Never ever in the history of mankind has Africa enjoyed more peace, more health, more freedom, and more economic growth compared to today. Still, there are tremendous problems that need to be solved. Between 2000 and 2015, global average life expectancy increased by 5 years. Worldwide, mostly in Africa. The fastest increase since the 1960s. The maternal mortality ratio has declined by 45% worldwide since 1990. 1990, many of us remember and not everyone, but many of us remember 1990. That was not the Middle Ages. And the number of new HIV infections dropped by 40% from 2000 to 2013, and we've recently seen data that the number of HIV/AIDS-related deaths has halved. Yet, we have also learned that new health crises have serious negative consequences. For instance, when it comes to economics, diseases harm economic growth and development. In Europe, cancer leads to lost productivity of more than 50 billion euros per year every single year. Diseases also pose a threat to flourishing trade and the stability of the financial markets. Just think of the global scare caused by the SARS epidemic in southern China back in 2003. Health can even affect the social stability of entire countries and regions, and this was obvious during the Ebola crisis in West Africa 3 years ago. Had Ebola, which killed about 11,000 people, had Ebola been an airborne disease, it might have killed 150 million people worldwide. And it is therefore not a surprise that health and such questions, pandemic preparedness, has a firm place on the agenda of high-caliber policy meetings such as the Munich Security Conference, and that people who are in charge of global security look into how we can be prepared to fight possible pandemics. And in the light of these developments, from my point of view, one aspect becomes clear. The best way to ensure our own health is to be concerned about the health of everyone else. Fostering global health means fostering the common good. So, yes, health is part of the common good, and it will remain so in future. The health challenges we currently face as a global community are severe, despite all the progress. Non-communicable diseases such as cancer, diabetes, and cardiovascular disease are on the rise around the globe. They kill almost 40 million people every year. Antimicrobial resistance, or AMR, is a major public health threat. These days, 700,000 people die each year due to antimicrobial resistance. And by the year 2050, that number could rise to a staggering 10 million per year. The so-called neglected tropical diseases, such as Chagas, guinea worm disease, or schistosomiasis plague about 1 billion people and cause hundreds of thousands of deaths, and often they affect the poorest of the poor in developing countries. And there is absolutely no one-size-fits-all solution to these health hazards. We need differentiated approaches. First and foremost, there are scientific challenges we must deal with. Consider the case of cancer. Over the past few years, immunotherapies have brought great progress. These new medicines seek to activate the body's own immune system to fight cancer, and for the first time in history, really for the first time in history and in medicine, it's a revolutionary development. We feel, many experts feel, that we are able to cure certain forms of cancer. They already help in a considerable number of patients, but for a greater portion of patients, they are not effective. And we do not know yet why. And therefore, we need to develop further therapies, and we need to use digital, artificial intelligence-based approaches. A new term, for instance, is digital pathology. I feel that the most promising way to do so is through our current system of innovation, competitive research, strong intellectual property rights, and rewards for the successful innovator, which takes me back to this question of common good versus private good and property in this context. To put it differently, to ultimately foster the common good, innovation must have the characteristics of a private good. Our current system of innovation has become the target of substantial criticism. Critics argue that a strong intellectual property protection prevents access to treatment for many. I would fundamentally disagree with this. People argue that we should propose rewarding successful innovation with predefined sums of money that more or less reflect the development cost plus a certain premium. For example, X euros for the development of a new cancer treatment. Intellectual property would then be openly accessible, and any institution, any company could produce the medicines. According to this view, patients would benefit from lower prices. Others propose a fully public, tax-based, tax-financed system of research, an ecosystem for research in health. My somewhat maybe polemic answer to such concepts would be, I grew up in a country that was divided in two parts. We had a field experiment. The chemical pharmaceutical industry in West Germany and in East Germany had exactly the same starting point. West Germany had become the pharmacy of the world after World War II, while as far as I know, there was one compound that made it out of a East German state-owned company. And I will not quote South and North Korea in this concept. Also, believing that R&D costs, that the ecosystem in which innovation flourishes is so simplistic, I would say, is a major mistake. Biopharmaceutical medicines reduce overall healthcare costs. Most of the medicines that have been introduced over the past years reduce overall spending, are cost-effective, lower spending mostly on hospitalization. They enable patients to work and to remain productive members of society for longer, and rather than input cost, the value of medicines should reflect the societal benefit. Secondly, to effectively treat diseases such as cancer or Alzheimer's, we need further breakthrough innovation. But for breakthrough innovation to happen, the potential reward must compensate the innovator for the risk of failure. This risk is very high in biopharmaceutical research. Only 12% of the drug candidates that enter clinical trials receive approvals for use in patients. 88% fail, almost 9 out of 10. If potential rewards more or less reflected the input cost, what company would take this kind of risk? The current system of innovation based on competitive research Strong intellectual property rights and rewards for the successful innovator is, from my point of view, the best option to meet most of the scientific challenges we face. Another field experiment is currently the race between China and India to develop novel medicine. India has a very strong local industry and no patent protection, and yet we do not see any compound coming out of India, while China, irrespective of whether how we would compare the political system between these two countries, China is adopting a strong intellectual property regime, and Chinese companies show incredible potential when it comes to developing new therapeutic options. It was almost ironical at this year's Davos World Economic Forum how the Chinese government was the herald of free enterprise, capitalism, world trade, and strong intellectual property protection. It created, among many of us, it created cognitive dissonance to compare that with the U.S. policy. I'm not saying that the current system is perfect for healthcare and for the entire economy. I recently read an article by Sebastian Buckup. He's a researcher at the World Economic Forum. Buckup argues that the economic policies of recent decades, paired with technological progress, led to an increasing concentration of power in the hands of just a few players. And these players being the financial industry and tech. And that most of the profits that have been generated over this period of time is in the hands of these few industries, which actually create very little employment, and that these firms would hoard profits and invest less. I don't share this view necessarily, but I think this is something that we should look into. That I will not go into detail. Buckup makes one important point that I share. He emphasizes that a vibrant entrepreneurial ecosystem is the most effective antidote to the concentration of economic power. I believe it should be easier for startups to scale up quickly. That's a huge advantage of the United States, Israel, many other ecosystems versus the European Union and Germany in particular. Economic rules should incentivize value creation over value capture. And this is critical. If we want to seize the potential of science and technology, we need the right economic rules in place. And the debate over how such rules should be shaped is, in my view, critical for our future economic success. Ladies and gentlemen, the current system of innovation, drives forward the development of many new technologies in healthcare. Yet there is one area where it utterly fails, and this is antimicrobial resistance. It means that there are more and more bacteria, fungi, that are resistant to any type of antibiotic that we currently have. And everyone agrees that we need new antibiotics as medicines of last resort. Yet we are struggling with the development of new medicines, and it's not necessarily a scientific hurdle. It's the question of the incentive system. The healthcare system tells the innovators, we want you to develop new antibiotics, but then we want to lock them up, obviously, and that makes a lot of sense, and use them only if needed. Therefore, in a consumption-based incentive system, this cannot work, and this is clear market failure, and we need to come up with, to tackle antimicrobial resistance, we need alternative incentive systems, and it is a major threat that we need to address. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think we must deal with scientific challenges, but at the same time, we must mind the ethical aspects of global health, because health affects individuals' well-being in the most fundamental manner possible. The distribution of healthcare immediately raises questions of equity, fairness, and dignity. One point is very important to me in that respect. We should not discuss ethical aspects solely in terms of redistribution. Instead, we should bear in mind what the philosopher Harry G. Frankfurt emphasized regarding equality, and I quote, "Economic equality is not as such of any particular moral importance. And by the same token, economic inequality is not in itself morally objectionable. From the point of view of morality, it is not important that everyone should have the same. What is morally important is that each should have enough. Or to put it differently, morally important is that everyone has access to effective healthcare. And this is by far not the case. For example, when it comes to non-communicable diseases such as cancer, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and many more, they often are referred to as diseases of affluence. But that is not true. Actually, developing countries bear the brunt of the burden. 3 out of 4 deaths due to non-communicable diseases occur there. Many healthcare systems in these countries are completely equipped to cope or ill-equipped to cope with the burden of these plagues. Imagine a cancer patient in Africa, somebody that we have salvaged from dying from HIV, somebody who reaches old age and then becomes a cancer patient. He or she will be probably diagnosed too late. He or she hardly has access to modern healthcare services, often even lacks basic painkillers. And even when he or she receives treatments, chances are high that the person has to pay out of pocket. Disease not only ruins health, it also ruins finances, and we should not and we cannot accept such circumstances. An important approach to improving access to health are intersectoral partnerships beyond traditional ideological barriers. Partnerships, joint action between public institutions, civil society organizations, and the private sector have proven to be effective. Many of the advances that I was talking about early on have been created by the collaboration by governments, by supranational institutions, by NGOs, by institutions such as the Gates Foundation, and by quite a few private sector players, many of them out of our industry, who have contributed to this. They have led to significant achievements, for example, in the fight against HIV/AIDS or malaria or neglected tropical diseases, and we need more of this. The challenges we face when it comes to non-communicable diseases are too great and are too complex for any one group to tackle alone. In 2011, diabetes caused the death of a patient every 7 seconds globally. In 2015, 1 patient died every 6 seconds. And this besides the fact that we have new treatment options and that they have been made available. It shows that we need to join forces, physicians, health authorities, patients, pharma companies, many more, to fight the disease. I firmly believe that if we collaborate across sector, we can significantly improve patients' lives in low and middle income countries, and we can improve the common good. I said early on that the situation in Africa is so much better than it ever was. Yes, but we have novel problems, and if we tackle some of these issues in the country of origin, we may be able to prevent some aspects of the migration developments. At the World Economic Forum this year, 22 biopharmaceutical companies, together with the World Bank and the Union for International Cancer Control, launched Access Accelerated, which is the first cross-sectoral partnership to improve the care for non-communicable diseases in developing countries. In the past, we have been accusing each other of not doing our job properly, and for a change, different parties decided to act together. And many companies are already doing a lot in this area. So private industry is joining forces with public institutions and civil society organizations, and together we're going to address a broad range of barriers to better care, including aspects such as financing and regulatory harmonization. Access Accelerated, from my point of view, shows that the private sector has a lot to contribute. And this partnership is, of course, not the only answer to these challenges posed, but the global community at large can and should do much more to address the issue. We can do a lot more to improve global health and work towards the common good through public, private, or whatever measures. So let me please refer to my initial question. Is health still part of what we call the common good, or is it becoming a private commodity? Is it preferable that we fully socialize healthcare, as some of the more radical US politicians on the Democratic side would suggest? Or should it be totally privatized? Should any public solution be banned? I think these radical views lead us nowhere, as it is crystal clear that we need to do what works best, and that we need to combine the strength of public and private approaches. And health, from my point of view, will always remain part of the common good. There is it does make sense to stipulate that access to health is as important as factors that we define under human rights. The private sector needs to lean in to work more towards equitable access to health. And I feel that this will continue to create conflict between various interest groups, and I think it's a good thing. It touches on what, in my opinion, is the most important aspect regarding the common good in the 21st century. We must come out of our trenches and put ideological differences aside. We can agree to disagree on certain topics and still work together to improve global health. And this may not sound very exciting, but it has proven to be highly effective in many successful projects, and it gives us reason to look optimistically toward the future, or to put it in the words of Nelson Mandela, where he said, and I quote, "Where people of goodwill get together and transcend their differences for the common good, peaceful and just solutions can be found, even for those problems which seem most intractable." Thank you very much for your attention.